Right. Uh, all right, we're live. We are live. Let's talk about let's talk about turtles and hares. uh, I gotta promote you. Promote. You are promoted, sir. Okay. I don't know. No, they're not. There's like so. I will pull it up on as soon as I get done sharing. I will pull it up on the web, and we'll look at it that way. Okay. Plaid Hat Games. Yeah, that's fine. So, anyways, yeah, I think. I mean, I was sort of thinking through that Dread Wraith deck since last night's game. Oh, and I'm sorry, everybody. I'm so tired today. It's been kind of a busy day, but um, oh, we our stream clipped over 1,000 views. That's kind of awesome. Um, yeah, that's pretty sweet. But I was hold on.
People or what?
It just means 1,000 different people have watched something from on our Twitch, which is kind of cool.
Wow,
I know.
that's very cool.
Yeah, I think that's pretty awesome. Um, or at least 1,000 people have, or 1,000. I don't know if it's unique views or if it's just number of people like watching something on our Twitch channel, right? So I don't know exactly how they classify their views, but it is what it is. Um, but I was thinking about that Dread Wraith deck a little bit, and I think it needs two things to work. Number one, the plan we had yesterday to use Fiona ability and Meteor at the end is still a proactive plan to potentially deal up to 8 damage to a Phoenix Born, but you have to go second so that um, you can go first on the top of round 2 and potentially get another 8 damage in, which would be 16 damage. And then I think the deck just needs to be nature for Molten Gold and Frostbites. And you can play Final Cries in the list as well. And you just end up on a burn plan. So it's very similar to sort of the Hydra approach, where you're like round one trying to get as much damage in, and then top of round 2 try to finish the game. And if you can't finish the game, like you just say, okay, like here we go, like we're gonna now play a burn game, right? And so I do think it needs 8 ceremonial dice to do that, but I just think Divine's probably the wrong pairing with it.
8 ceremonial dice makes your frostbites and molten golds really awkward.
I know, and if you go 6 ceremonial dice, like you're sort of in this plan of like Dreadwraith either works right away or it doesn't, and then you probably just lose. It's probably a one trick pony like Hydra is, but I think it's still potentially a good one trick pony. I think when you consider it in that scope. And it does a fairly decent job of fighting like some of the meta answers that were meta answers to Hydra, because Hydra was a singular threat, whereas the Dread Wraith is not. So if you have to go into a longer game, maybe
Right. The difference being that the Hydra actually kills you, and
right.
uh,
Yeah, I mean it's
Dread Wraith.
potentially possible. You can still massive growth a Dread Wraith, right? Like you could still MG a Dread Wraith. And if MG is not part of your first 5, so be it. But like, that is something you can still do. So I'm just wondering, like, if it's 2 divine, 2 nature, and 6 ceremonial, if that is enough to get it done. Um, and then you can still do other things, right? Like you don't have to be all bought into that, but it that's got to be the main plan and sort of the main core around the deck, I think, in order for it to work. And I do think it's hard. I do think it'd be hard for your opponent to kill both of them in one round. I mean, I think they even if they have double removal, um, I think it's slow enough that like it would be it would be difficult. It would require a consistent investment to kill
It
them.
just depends on what you leave on the board.
Sure.
That's like what it comes down to because you're never going to kill him round one.
Yeah,
Just
and I think
won't.
I think if you have nature
And
on round one, then you can kill everything because you can just meditate your nature dice to their power sides, and if you meteor for three, like next turn side action nature die to kill a 4 health unit, and then just a swing with into an open board, right? Like that's what I'm thinking. I could be wrong, but again, that's what I'm thinking.
right,
Um,
the meteor has to kill all their guys or you're sunk.
yeah,
Like
agreed.
they block once, you're just probably dead.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's the same thing I said about it last night, where I think like it's a fine casual deck, but won't be competitive because Dread Wraith is just too expensive.
yeah.
Like,
I just don't know if I don't know if that's entirely true. Just because like we pay 3 dice for so many things. Like how is that any?
right, so many things that have more than one power without extra work.
No, that's not true. I mean, like when you look at the Hydra plan doesn't have more than one power. With you'd have to have
Are
extra
you
work
talking
with the
about the
Hydra.
combo deck?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
the Hydra combo
like
deck.
okay, so excluding combo decks that have very specific requirements for cards,
Sure.
like everything, like what would you pay 3 dice for that has one power without outside influence, just in a vacuum?
Honestly, I would pay 3 dice for one power for an effect like Scald. I think you're
Well, we're talking about cards that exist.
well,
Like,
right, but I mean, I'm just talking about like I'm talking about. I pay 3 dice for one power in the Hydra. Um, I pay
but
three.
Hydra is one power, but a much larger threat without extra work. It's just itself because if left alone, it gets bigger by itself.
No, if it's left alone, it never gets bigger. You have to interact with it to make it grow, right? Like you have to like you're.
Right, but so let's say that your plan is to ignore it, and
Mhm,
I just attack one of your guys.
mhm.
Like it will grow, right? Like
No,
every
I
time that
just
we've
defend
like
with
I've
no
played a lot
counter.
of Hydras, and you kill it aggressively every time.
Sure, but I think that's going to be true for any unit that costs 3. And one of the things that Dread Wraith does a really nice job is fighting against River Skull because there's no way to one shot the Dread Wraith without having the Hunter's Mark Herald. Right, like that's one thing that Dread Wraith really does fight in the meta that's sort of warping the meta right now is Skull.
I
Um,
mean, you essentially like lost a Scald yesterday, right? Like
yeah, but
playing
I
that
just think
deck.
I think my whole deck was wrong. Like that's what I'm getting at. Like I think that the deck was too unfocused is what I was getting at with as I think about it overnight. I think what happened was number one, huge mistake in round one not making second Dread Wraith. Number two, being able to do that on demand whenever a meteor is in hand is just another source of damage. And then having access to other burn things and final cries and things like that just continues to punish your opponent. I mean, it theoretically can put out a lot of damage very quickly, and I think that that's the kind of deck that might be better than what it seems like just in a vacuum. I don't know. I mean, again, I sure if I'm just talking about like Hydra is first round banned, right? Like we've talked about that. Massive Growth is first round banned, and those 2 cards were for now. I mean, I don't know if that'll actually hold in real OP rules come out, but at some point, we have to sit back and say, okay, are we just going to first 5 ban and restrict every potentially large unit? But I think if you're trying to play a fair game, when you think about 3 cost units in the game, one of the reasons why 3 cost units in the game have suffered so badly is because of Scald. I mean, we have to admit that, right? Like So if that's true, and 3 cost units suffer so badly because of skull, because you can just easily, you know, deal with a 4 life unit like a knight with a scald and a nature die, or take your poison of any other sort of direct pinger type of damage, then the Dreadwraith is better positioned at 6 life, to be able to stand up for that. Now it's sort of the same thing. Like we're going to get into talking about the time, and you were talking about you like Turtle Guard because you have to commit an actual removal spell to it instead of uh, being able to
Still
damage
kills
it.
it.
What's that?
Scald still kills it,
As long as it's not
assuming that it
exhausted.
hasn't blocked yet.
Correct. That's right. That's right. So that's exactly my point, right? Um, so I think that the Dreadwraith is undervalued right now. I do think so.
I I will respectfully disagree,
Okay.
and you're welcome to play it. But if you think that it's good against Scald, like it was not good against Scald last night.
I think it was fine against Scald
And
last night. I think I lost on other accords because I was doing other things that weren't good against Scalds. That's what I think right
like
now.
I played 2 Scalds mode of just draw a card, not shoot anything last night.
Sure.
And like then it's just a 2/2 because I had 5 cards in hand. I didn't redraw one of the times. Like
Right. And again,
I didn't actually gain value from the draw card.
and I missed a huge opportunity to take control of the board. Number one, I went first, which I think was a mistake. And number two, I didn't play second Wraith in round one. I think both of those things, like if I wipe your board and I do what I did at the top of round one, where I hit you with in an open board for 4 damage, if I'd had second Wraith, that'd have been 8 damage. And if I was going second, that'd have turned into 16 damage. Because you wouldn't have been able to respond to it. I mean, that it doesn't get much better than that. Now, maybe you lose if you go first. Like maybe you lose always if you go first. I don't know. I mean that's a part of this the development of the deck that I think we have to like I'd have to spend some time doing. But I think the deck is much more resilient than what you're wanting to give it credit for right now. That's all I'm going to say about it. Because I think many decks,
I just told you that it's very playable in a casual format.
I
Like
think it's
just
playable
because
in a
it's not
competitive format. I mean, because competitive decks are first fiving Scalds to kill big units, but it can't kill the Dreadwraith. It can't. And if they don't choose to use the Scald, I think you're actually winning that exchange overall over time. Now I think you have to have the rest of the deck set up to do things against your opponent, right? Like I don't think you can um it's not solely going to win on Dreadwraith, but Hydra has the same thing. Like if you can shut down the Hydra, you have to win through other things in the Hydra deck, right? Like it's just the way it works.
well, if you're playing Hydra combo, again we're talking about Hydra combo. If you don't win through the Hydra, you're essentially conceding.
Well, that's not true
Like
because we played 3 or 4 games where you never were able to beat the Hydra in those 3 or 4 games. Like we still, the Hydra still ended up winning at the end of the day. Like it still did. Like it's a much tighter game, right? It's a much fairer game, but it does. I mean, it's just I think that 2 Dreadwraiths is and Meteor as your first 5 is as a tempo swing that can be very powerful, and I think it can do a lot of things and it can win you games. And I'm not saying just in a casual
I
format.
agree with that statement. I agree that making two like having 2 Dreadwraiths on a board and casting Meteor can win you a game.
Yeah.
I don't believe I like until I see it. I don't believe that Dreadwraith is worth it
Yeah.
because like it's 3 dice for a 1/6, and then you have to like put extra work into it to make it good.
I
And
guess
you know,
I'm
we
going.
played a lot of Transformers, and we discussed a lot of times like how cards that make gas are good and cards that require gas are not good. Like
I do agree with that in other card games, but Ashes is a game where there are very few cards that actually make gas. Almost every card is requires something else to give it gas. It's just the way it works in Ashes. Like the way Ashes works as a card game is just fundamentally different than so many other card games. And I'm not it's not a knock on other card games or Ashes. It's just a conversation of okay, like if that's true, then Ashes is more about turn setup and more about like round setup and playing the correct sequencing round over round to put yourself in the best position to win, 3, 4 moves in front of where you're actually at. And Whereas, like, I'm just going to use Magic as an example. You might be thinking about Magic in that sort of sense a little bit, but Magic's a lot about responding to the here and now and being proactive in that exact moment, right? And then seeing if your opponent has answers or not in that exact moment. So that's I just think that's fundamentally a difference between Magic and Ashes, and also like Transformers was very similar to Magic in being very proactive. I agree that like passive cards in Transformers were very terrible. I don't think there were any really good passive cards in Transformers. Um, so you had, I mean, but Transformers and Ashes are two wildly different games. Um, so, anyways, again, I'm not saying that this isn't the unbeatable deck or any of those things. I think every deck so far that has ever been found in Ashes is beatable in some way, right? Like I just think that's true. But I do think that your opponent would have to have a very specific plan for Dreadwraith. And if they don't have a very specific plan for Dreadwraith and Meteor round one, um, then I think it's a real threat to kill many Phoenixborns and put opponents on their heels very quickly. And if you put your opponents on heal very quickly, like that just like you just play 3 copies of Final Cry and you play um, Frostbites and you play Molten Golds and the game is over. Like that's the win con for every single Phoenixborn in the pool right now. Right? Like everything else you do from there is just like, okay, I'm just going to continue to make these 1/6 dread rates that will protect me while I build to the winning the game. Because hell, if you really wanted to get like cheeky with it, you could turn around and put look at not buying into as deep of a combo on the nature side, like not going with the molten golds, and you could add charm in, and then you have the option to play devotion. And devotion just gives it alert and inexhaustible, but can't attack. And so one of your dread wraiths just turns into a wall. So I mean, I think adding nature to the deck potentially gives you the opportunity even to massive growth a dread wraith and get the same sort of value out of it. But then, I mean, the sky's also the limit there potentially too. Again, I'm not saying that this is the end all be all deck or anything, but I think it undervalues the value of Dreadwraith, and as a 3 cost summons in the game. I can't think of another 3 cost summons in the game that has as much potential ceiling.
You just like jump ship on Shadowhound.
No, I like Shadowhound a lot. I like
Because
Shadowhound.
Shadowhound's a million times better than
I think
Dread
Shadowhound.
Wraith.
But the problem with okay, so yes, Shadowhound. Once it's double focused, Shadowhound is very good. But Shadowhound is really costing you, even with the resonance plays, like we were like the Shadowhound deck we have built or I have built. It's actually costing you 5 dice to make a single Shadowhound, the first Shadowhound.
Right, and you're talking about an 8 dice combo with
Sure.
Dread Wraith. Like, so 5 dice is much more affordable.
I mean, 5 dice for a single Shadowhound is more affordable. The Shadowhound does suffer from not being able to put face damage on a Phoenixborn if an opponent plays big tall units. Like if they play any 3/4s, right? Like Shadowhound is pinging for 2 and attacking, right? Like Shadowhound is well positioned to deal with Archosaurus Mount. It's well positioned, but it's positioned in a way that you're using those things, like you said, to get grindy advantage. It's a different kind of deck. I don't think Shadowhound's bad. I just think it's a different kind of deck. And I think Shadowhound.
I agree, it's a different kind of deck. I think it is a better 3 dice summon than Dread Wraith.
Maybe
is what I was saying.
I don't know. I'm not willing to, because I think you could support. What you can do is support the Dread Wraith with a smaller, wider position where you don't necessarily need 2 Dread Wraiths to be effective. And if your opponent then starts to play things like their own meteors and their own, Nature's Wraths and things like that to try to sweep your board, like they're just empowering Dread Wraith, right? Like it's a trade. So I think the card is different, and I think that it's different enough that I think it might be slightly overlooked. Maybe. Again, it's unproven. I've just been thinking about it since our game last night, and I feel like I just had the
It
deck
might be
completely built
overlooked.
wrong.
I think there's a big difference between saying that it's like one of the best or the
Oh,
best
I
three
didn't.
dice summon and saying that it's overlooked.
I think on 3 dice conjuration summons, it's got to be one of the better 3 dice conjuration summons. It's got to be up there. I think.
There's a total of 3 of them, right?
No, you've got Majestic Titan, you've got Ice Golem, you've got
Ice Golem costs 3. That card sucks.
yeah, it's bad. Right, it's bad. That's what I'm getting at. Right, like it's got Emperor Lion.
Emperor
Uh,
Lion's way better than Dreadwraith.
I like Emperor
It's
Lion a lot.
awesome.
I like Emperor Lion. It's situationally good. I mean, obviously, like there are board states, and if your opponent's playing tall units, then like Law of Domination with Emperor Lion is very good. But that's really, in my opinion, that's a 4 dice summon at that point, not a 3. Right? Like it's it's not exactly the
Right.
same.
It's like a 3.5 because you can still make a 3/3 if
Sure.
you need a 3/3.
Right.
Like it's not like it's locked in at 4. It's
No.
just way better at 4.
Right. So I still think you're getting most of the value out of a 3/3 that can play another card instantly, an action sheet, right? And that's powerful as Emperor Lion goes. But it's not, again, not the end all be all. I just think that, I think that potentially you have to consider how to be really aggressive with Dreadwraith, right? Like how to be really proactive with pumping Dreadwraith and making sure your opponent doesn't have a board state. It's sort of a similar kind of mindset to like the Kneel Mirror Spirit deck, right? Like where you kneel things out and you cast a Mirror Spirit, and that Mirror Spirit's got 7 or 8 attack on it. Like that is a similar sort of um, style of deck as this, right? It's just doing it. It's a different flavor, but it's essentially kind of the same thing, right? Making sure that you have an open board essentially, or a ability to bypass any units in play and deal face damage with your unit. And if that unit's big and powerful, then it's doing things. And Dreadwraith can be big or powerful. It's but it's, in my opinion, it's done still as a multiple. I don't think you would want to play a single Dreadwraith. I don't think a single Dreadwraith can do it. I think Fiona has to be the PB for it. And that may put you far enough behind that it just doesn't matter.
So of all, I just looked at all the summon books. Of all the summon books, worth more than 2.
Are you
I think that
including
it's
book tax on these? Because then
no,
okay, because I think book tax matters
just
too, right?
just booked activation.
Okay, but I
I mean,
still
I
think
guess if your plan is like turn 1 combo or whatever, like I think that it is better than Rhino. I think it's roughly the same as Majestic Titan.
I mean Majestic Titan costs 4 for the first one. How do you figure? Majestic Titan, you have to pay for the book still to play the Titan.
Okay, so Majestic Titan is worse because it costs 4.
Right.
I think that Emperor Lion is better. I think that Shadowhound is better. And that's it. There's no more. And I think for the most part, all of these cards are worse than the ones that cost 2. Like
I mean, I
that
think you have to
like
consider
Frostbite Bear and Wing
Frostbite Bear
Lioness.
costs 3 because of the book too, though. So you have to consider Frostbite Bear at least on the first
Frostbite
one.
Bear is better than it. Like
I don't disagree. Frostbite Bear is good. It's one of
maybe it's better than Ghostly Mount.
I mean,
Hard to say.
Ghostly Mount is a 3 cost. I think obviously the real power in Ghostly Mount actually comes from getting the Nightmare Mount. I mean, the Pale Steed Mount is okay as a 2/4 unit guard. That's okay. Like whatever.
It's probably better than Squall Stallion.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Squall Stallion.
But
I mean,
I don't know.
I'm just talking like from a pure, because I mean even Mindfog Owl costs 3 when you look at the book tax.
Right, but when it again, you were talking about like the difference in the deck types between like the Shadowhound deck and the Dreadwraith deck that we're
Sure.
talking about. The Dreadwraith deck really cares about that tax, like the book cost,
Mhm.
because it tries to win in, right away.
Mhm.
Decks that play Mindfog Owl probably care way less about the book cost
Mhm.
because they're probably on a longer plan. right? Like,
I mean, I totally agree. I just think they're different styles of decks, right? At the end of the day, that's all I'm saying. Whether or not they're good or bad or indifferent is just a matter of, um, a discussion of like, what is the deck's purpose, right? How is it focused? I think one of the issues I had last night with the version that I played last night was it was too unfocused. And I think that it can be infinitely better if it's more focused. Um, and I think that's done by playing 2 nature, 2 divine, and 6 ceremony. I think that's the way it's done. Um, it means that you are aggressively meditating. There is some risk. I mean
and
it's
you're
a
just not going to play any ceremonial cards in the pile.
not maybe in some turns. I think the turns where you um I think turns where you can't meteor your dread wraiths, it's less inclined to actually cast the dread wraith in that scenario, right? But like if you end up with a meteor in hand, right, or if you have a massive growth in hand, then in my opinion you can go dread wraith massive growth, and you've got essentially the same thing. You've got a 5/10 at that point, right? So, but again, it's all about that has to be the final play once the board is swept. If the board's not swept, it doesn't really mean anything, right? So again, Dread Wraith, to me, paying for the Dread Wraith is only a process of paying for the Dread Wraith when you have the ability to sweep the board with a meteor. And so there are other access things. Like at this point, you could play Nature's Wrath as well. It's not as good, right? Obviously, not as good, like because you're just making a Dread Wraith into a 2 attack, but it might change the tempo enough to matter if you do that at a particularly key point. I think a deck was like this is really hard to play. Also, like I think you have to play it enough to get really comfortable in various matchups.
Well, your first turn is scripted, right? Like,
Oh, for sure, for sure.
so
But after the first turn, I mean, like if you can't, if for some reason you cannot get to 8 damage and then another 8 damage on the top of round 2 because maybe you didn't go second, right? Like then you're probably getting to like 8 and 12. And if the Dread Wraiths die after that, you don't care. Like your opponent just spent time and dice removing something that you got all your value out of them. And I think that means that you don't have to actually focus the Dread Wraith books. In fact, I think it's wasted card slots. Um,
right, I agree. Why would you ever play additional?
right. I mean, part of what you're hoping to do with Dread Wraith, right, is be able to stand in front of a 3/4, take 3 counters on it, and then focus cast a Dread Wraith to unexhaust. But there's just a million better ways to unexhaust a Dread Wraith, right? Like Adrenaline Rush is a perfect example of that. So
Yeah, that's obviously the best one.
right. So again, I'm not saying that the deck is. I don't know yet. I don't know. I just think that in my mind, theoretically, when I think about competitive decks that I've gone against, it's well positioned in many, many cases to fight those competitive lists because I think you can still run festers, right? So if you meteor sweep and there's a 3/4 left, like you can just fester it away. Same thing, like if you meteor sweep into a Hydra and the Hydra then heals, like you can then fester that away, assuming that your opponent's not on a Golden Veil plan. And you can't do that all in round 1, obviously. This is talking about like deep into the game sort of gameplay where I'm thinking about what are things that people do deep into the game. People like to massive growth bears, right? Because it's 6 attack with Terrify 1. So, um, Fester is a good answer for that sort of gameplay. Um, Small Sacrifice is maybe okay in this deck. I don't know. We will eventually, chits and giggles. We are not right now because obviously we don't have the cards. And once the cards arrive, then we will transition off of TTS and over into webcam because we'd much rather play with the real cards. Appreciate the question.
I agree.
But for right now, we're still playing on TTS. So let's jump over to the preview, Jericho preview 3, really quick, Neil, because we've spent way more time talking theory on Dread Wraith, and I'd like to be able to try to get a game in tonight.
We got some people on now finally.
Yeah, we do,
so that we can talk about the spoiler.
Yep. So,
and I'm super excited about these cards, by the way.
All right, so
I think they're both just awesome.
Let's start with the Summon Time Hopper. It's a ready spell. No book tax, just a main action to play the book. Side action of exhaust and one time power. Place a time hopper conjuration onto your battlefield. If it's focused, then if you control an unexhausted time hopper with one or more status tokens on it, you may place an additional time hopper conjuration onto the battlefield.
Go. You need to read the time hopper too, because it's
Yeah,
important to how
yeah,
this
yeah.
actually like plays out.
For sure. I was just reading Chits and Giggles. He said, "Oh, okay, TTS, because I have the physical cards from OG set. Have to get the new red box." Yeah, we we transitioned quickly away from 1.0 in our coverage.
Right?
Back
We
in
did
like
play it some,
right.
but because the new set is like completely spoiled, and I think the cards are more fun and the rules are better,
Yes,
we have switched to Reborn. And
I think the biggest factor is the combat rule changes in Reborn make the game much more dynamic.
right,
Um, so okay, so let's go to the Time Hopper. Time Hopper is a conjuration with a conjuration limit of 4. Has a stat line of 110. Fine. I mean, we've seen lots of 1-1s like Mist Spirits be very powerful in decks. Gift 1. When this unit comes into play, you may place one status token on another target unit. And it is fearful, which just means it can't block. Um, yeah, no problem, Chits. It's definitely worth it. I think you if you liked 1.0 Ashes, I think you would be strongly. I think it'd be really hard to see you not liking Reborn because I just think it solves so many of the um so many of the combat problems, and the cards are much more simplified in general. And so I think that that simplicity actually leads to better gameplay because you're not like trying to figure out how to resolve stacks on stacks of triggers and all kinds of different things. And Neil and I like to get into rules lawyering from time to time, so you might catch a stream where we're talking about rules interactions. But yeah, appreciate you being here with us tonight, though. It's awesome to have you here. Um, so let's talk about this, Neil. Let's talk about the time hopper and what it's doing because the focus ability on this book is pretty insane, right? Like and when you think about Jericho, and like we talked about Jericho 2 or 3 weeks back, and we said, oh yeah, like we're basically guaranteeing we can focus anything once now, right? Like we just have to play support cards that let us draw the card that Jericho puts on top. So like Jericho goes Jericho power, place summon time hopper book on top. We draw that somehow with a plethora of different ways that you can approach draw, whether that's a River Scald or Changing Winds or take your pick, right? Um, and then you go, okay, now I cast my first time hopper. Obviously, that time hopper doesn't have a focus token, so the focus doesn't matter right away. But if I then play the second book with now focus and use time power to status it or do a number of different ways we can get status on this thing, then you end up in a situation
well,
where
assuming your first time hopper survives, second activation of book makes 2 automatically.
correct. That's what I'm getting at. So now, if you can actually get that set up, like you could, in theory, play 3 time hoppers right away. And then it just sort of spirals out from there. It's really more setting up for round 2 more than it is even round 1 because I have a feeling you're going to have a hard time casting second time hopper round 1. But it's a very good possibility that you can cast second time hopper round 1 and have it live. And if it does, um, it's going to be a situation where these guys are going to multiply very quickly and get way out of hand really fast. And I think that's the kind of thing that a wide aggro style deck wants to do. And
Right, this card's super aggressive.
right. And I think that this
Since it
is
can't block, it's not defensive.
right. And I think you know this is the kind of card that Immortal Commander wants to maybe sit alongside as well. Right? Like I think Immortal Commander is a
Well,
potential target here.
this is the best friend of Standard Bearer.
Yeah, for sure. I
Like straight up just insane with Standard Bearer, right? Because you make 3 dudes. The third one comes into play. You can put a counter on your standard bearer
mhm,
so that you can get in and pump them all.
that's right. That's
like
exactly right. So
like
I
this is just an aggressive card or a combo card because if there's some synergy deck with uh status counters, which we're like 90% sure there is, right? Because all of the cards that have been spoiled so far have to do with status counters,
correct.
and the time power has to do with status counters. So like this is a status counter machine.
Right.
Like it makes a bunch of dudes and it makes a bunch of status counters if you want it to.
Right. and Standard Bearer is a fine card from just a pure like stat line. So I think that there's lots of room for this card to work. And again,
And I think especially early after Jericho is printed, when everybody's going to want to play those cards,
right.
like you're going to see a lot of time hoppers and standard bearers in play. Like
I think the other card that might
the fact
be
that it's a side action is absolutely insane.
I
Like
agree that
you
makes
get
it
2/1/1s for 1 dice on a side action.
yeah that makes poor Masked Wolves look pretty sad, right? Like
Yeah, Masked Wolf sucks. Don't even play no anymore.
yeah, I mean it's unfortunate because I do like Noah as a Phoenixborn, but the Masked Wolf is kind of sad.
Masked Wolves is still okay
It's okay. It's not as good as this. This is definitely a better version of it. And I was looking at trying to
because it's a
find
class dice, right? Like
right.
it's not a turtle.
It's not a right. It's
Side action class dice make 2/1/1s
right
and a
when
status counter anywhere you want it.
right. Whereas Noah requires you to have 2 dice to do that, and one has to be a power. One power, one class, essentially, to do the same thing. Make two
And you have to
ones.
have a second book.
Well,
In this case,
you have to
you
have a
could have a
second book.
resonance.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Like
I mean,
because
Noah.
the
Yeah.
first book itself, like Noah's makes like you activate book, make a 2/1. It gives you additional side action to activate your other book, right? To
Right.
make a 2/1. Whereas in this case, if you had 2 books, you could just make 4 guys.
Right. That's true. And I was wondering if this ultimately ends up being a good overall position for Invigorate. And Invigorate is just for a single sympathy class or a single nature class side action, place 1 status token on up to 3 target units. So I don't know if you're going to actually hit 3 with Invigorate, but the fact that you can Standard Bear and put 1 on the first time hopper right away means that next turn you're actually able to make your 2 time hoppers the way you want.
I mean, that is something you could do for the cost of 1-time power dice and no cards. You can just put a counter on your bunny and make more bunnies.
Sure.
I guess you can't in the same turn because it's side action, but
right. That's why
like you can't invigorate in the same turn either. So
no, that's true.
That's
true.
Like invigorate's good if you have like 2 standard bears and a bunny in play.
Right. Yeah.
But the bunny itself, like you essentially only want 1 bunny that has a time counter.
Mm-hmm. Status counter.
Because we're assuming that you're going to have other things you want to put those status counters on.
Correct. Right.
Does it have to put it on a unit or can it be on any card? The gift ability.
On target unit.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's not like insane. I guess that would be really, really dumb with like the charge up, like with chance and stuff and fallen.
I wonder if the bunny is
just like.
I wonder if the bunny is fast enough with Squall Stallion, like to just be able to make like Squall Stallions into 2/3s, and having 2/2/3s and like bunnies might be kind of fun too. I don't know. I'm not sure.
That is the correct word. I don't know if good is the correct word.
Well, because
you got to think about it in a way that like again, this is similar to the discussion we just had about Dreadwraith, where you put a bunch of work into Squall Stallion.
Sure, but Squall Stallion has a nice. I mean, the torrent ability is fine. I don't know whether you would use it because it's a side action in and of itself, and so we're seeing even more tax on side actions. Like I played a Noah side action heavy deck and found that you can get yourself really inundated with side actions where all you have left to do is pass main because everything you have in your hand or everything you have on the board is side actions. So you have to be kind of careful when you start talking about these side action cards because you could end up in a situation where like you just don't get to set things up because you pass main, your opponent goes, fine, I'll pass. Because especially if you're the one holding first player token and you're just going to hand it over to your opponent instead. So it's just something to think about. But I do think that I think Time Hopper is very cool. And
I think this card is exciting from a competitive point of view and from a fun point of view. Like it does a ton of things. It's cheap, it's efficient, like it's just like the exact description of a good card
Mhm.
where
And you might be able to do this with Huntmaster as well, just if you're really thinking about it, because Huntmaster comes in with 2 status tokens on it and has a side action, remove a status token from this unit to add 1 attack to a target unit until the end of your turn. That part doesn't really matter to me. It also, Huntmaster comes with a Panther Spirit. So, like, if you're looking at a main action play Huntmaster, side action play Time Hopper, like, not a terrible play, right? Like, putting the
I,
guy, putting a
yeah,
token
I
on
think most of the
Huntmaster.
time Standard Bearer will be better than that because Standard Bearer is cheaper and on color and does essentially the same thing. You just don't get an extra 1/1.
Well, I think you have an opportunity, right? Like, I don't think you're probably going to play a pure time deck. Like, I mean, there's going to be a mix. Like,
No, but if you put Huntmaster in your deck, you've locked yourself into 3 colors already, and
correct.
Huntmaster requires a power dice. Whereas, like, you could play Standard Bearer plus Time Hopper in essentially anything
Mm-hmm.
with whatever other cards you want.
I think you could look at them. I think both are playable, as what I'm getting at in this kind of deck with Time Hopper. Is all I'm saying. Because your opponent's going to ultimately get into like you're going to get into a place where your opponent has to respect this board state that develops, right? And either they have a sweeper or they don't. That's what these wide decks do. That's what Mist Spirits do, right? When you cast Mist Spirits, that's what
Right.
Widows do when you cast Widows. Um, and Time Hoppers will struggle with all the same things that all of those decks struggle with. Like if you go up against Cole, Cole's gonna make it really hard on your Time Hoppers. But at the same time, like again, because it's a side action, it does what Noah's Wolves do against Cole as well, which
Right. I mean, because it's a single dice to make 2 guys, like the first one makes 1. So you're
Mhm.
like the first one is essentially always make 1 guy.
right. But if they're playing
But
Cole, you're not
on
going to get a second.
after
You're not
that,
going to get 2 extra. I mean, even if you focus, you're not going to get 2 extras, right? You're only going to get 1 more off of Focus Book. Against decks that remove one
yeah,
ones.
that's probably true against Cole specifically.
Yeah.
But I'd still spend 1 time class to make them discard over and over again. So
Sure. I think that's fine. I mean, again, and what makes this ultimately work is what it doesn't say here is that the status token an unexhausted time hopper. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure if you could just put it on an exhausted time hopper and get 2 units, which would also be just insane value. So the first one does have to live into the next round. That is a tricky proposition for a 1/1. But it's possible. Get your particle shields out, folks. um, but anyways, let's move on from it.
right, and so I mean, the last thing I'll say about Time Hopper is you're right. So the first one has to live. That being said, like if you make a 1/1 for 1 class dice and your opponent is forced to use a removal spell on it, like
Yeah, it's good
you're
value.
definitely winning in that exchange.
Right. We talked about this. I was talking about this with somebody on the Discord because we were talking about why Scald is so good, and ultimately I said because Scald is a 2 dice removal spell that replaces itself. Um, and so you don't actually lose a card, right?
Right, there's 1,000 reasons it's good.
and you still get a 2/2 body on the battlefield, right? So it's like you still have a permanent presence on the battlefield. And I talk a lot about permanent presence in my Herald series because Herald, like the games I won with Herald were the games where I was able to maintain more permanence on board than my opponent, and that includes the ready spells and that includes the units, right? So it's not all units. I mean, ready spells at the ready on board are permanents on board that you have sort of in your back pocket. And if you've had to exhaust your ready spells early and your opponent hasn't exhausted theirs, they're still maintaining a board presence, a permanence presence that's better than yours. So it's I think it's something to consider when you think about how to play Ashes. And Time Hopper, it's not like you have to. It's not like Time Hopper has to come out as your second action of round one, right? Like it can be a late play kind of scenario where your opponent has spent dice and spent cards trying to take care of something else, and then it's like
As soon as you have the second book, making 1 Time Hopper becomes a big threat.
right,
Like your opponent has to deal with that 1 Time Hopper
that's
if
right,
you have another book up and available.
that's right.
And it's I don't know. This card seems really good to me.
Well, we'll see how it plays out. I think it's going to be good. I do. I just, and I think that it further solidifies that the meta, like that we were seeing in AIL, start to shift to wider, sort of low cost units, like what you were playing yesterday, even, um, is continuing to develop and continuing to be sort of the dominant strategy for Ash's play in general. I think that you can have a splashy big unit, but you certainly don't want to put all your eggs into big unit attacks unless you have some plan to like I said, to get in for damage. Because if your opponent can just stand in front of your Hammer Knight, right, and they take no PB damage, like you're probably losing that exchange over and over again. And there's just so many favorable like 2 and 1 mana removals that it's just not good for your Hammer Knight long term. It's very rare you see units live through rounds, right? Like when we talk about how Ashes is played, you just don't see units make it round over round. And if units do make it over round, you're probably winning pretty big. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about the Turtle Guard.
Yeah, let's talk about a unit that will probably live round over round.
Maybe, yeah. This is a Summon Turtle Guard book. It's a ready spell board. It has a main and a side action cost, so it's an expensive book to play. 1 dice to actually pay the book, so the book tax of 1 dice. And then when you want to play the Turtle Guard itself, it's a main and a side, and exhaust, and a time power. And you place a Turtle Guard Conjuration on your battlefield. If this book is focused, you do not. If you do not, you may place 1 exhaustion token on an unexhausted Turtle Guard you control to place 1 exhaustion token on target unexhausted unit an opponent controls. That card, that's really cool. The focus on this is really cool. Again, Focus 1 plays right into Jericho and Jericho's ability to give you focus books. So depending on what you're trying to set up, I think you can set up Turtle Guards early to build Time Hoppers late. There's a lot of different things that could happen there. But
the decks that want Time Hoppers and the decks that want Turtles are very different decks, I think.
Well, but they're going to come as a precon, right? So when you talk about a precon,
right.
they're going to be
if you're playing the precon.
Yeah. So anyways, Turtle Guard itself has a conjuration limit of 2. So that does make the focus a little more difficult to trigger because you got to play essentially 2 Turtle Guards, and that could be difficult, right? But the Turtle Guard itself has got a stat line of 2/3/1. So here's a conjuration with recover 1. We know how good Winged Lioness is for that reason, right? Like Winged Lioness has got 2 health and recover 1. 3 health, recover 1 becomes a real tricky proposal because it's going to take you potentially some rounds to deal with Turtle Guard, maybe. And this is a rooted unit, so it can't attack. We've seen how that doesn't necessarily matter when you talk about like we were using Mayoni with command strikes and biters, right, to do 3 damage. Now this isn't as aggressive as biter, but still there's lots of instances where you could command strike a 2 attack unexhausted Turtle Guard as a removal, and that might be okay. And then it has withdraw. While this unit is exhausted, prevent all damage dealt to this unit from being received. That's where this card is insane. Insane. So like you can exhaust things in so many different ways. And I think that the fact that you can be using the Turtle Guard in that sort of way to make it live round over round opens up all kinds of gameplay, particularly when we think about like Meteor and like its ability to sweep boards. And traditionally it sweeps your own board while you're at it, but not if you have an exhausted Turtle Guard. The Turtle Guard just it's still around next turn while your opponent doesn't have any board presence at all. So I would love to hear your thoughts on it, Neil. I think this card is well, it's the literal definition of a turtle card, right? It's
so in 1.0 Turtle Guard was also really, really good.
Sure.
It was a little different because you could like block and not counter.
Mm-hmm.
But specific to this, like, I think this guy's awesome. Obviously, it's not aggressive because it can't attack, but it like if all it does is block 1/1s and 2/2s all day, like
yeah, 1/1s, 2/1s, 2/2s.
The problem with cards that are like 3/4s or like like Essence Druid, like just these guys that you like put some dice into, and then you're getting overrun, so you have to block. Is like, you know, they attack you, you block with your guy, like maybe your guy kills them, but then the rest of their dudes just get free attacks on that guy.
Mhm.
Like they just have like tap my men, kill your guys
Right.
once they're exhausted. That can't happen to Turtle Guard.
That's true.
Turtle Guard requires a 3 damage source right away or a real kill spell.
Right.
And I think that's very good. And the conjuration limit is like a blessing and a curse, right? Because this is the kind of thing that, you know, if you get 3 or 4 of these in play, your opponent's just never attacking you.
That's right.
If but
you can't get 3 or 4 because of
it having the low count stops that, but it also turns on the book a lot faster.
Mhm.
Because when you think about the cards that do stuff like what is it, Admonisher, that's like make an Admonisher if you can't do this.
Right. If you can't make the Admonisher deal a point of damage, and the Admonisher's got a
Right.
3 count conjuration limit, and that can be tricky, right? So
Right. So Admonisher, like, it's really hard to get the ping out of the Admonisher book
well, I think the best
because there's more conjurations and because the Admonishers die.
right.
But these things are so sticky because of the withdrawal ability that, like, you're just going to get them both in play really fast.
Right.
And then you have focus activation of the book. Like, I imagine most board states with Turtle Guard are going to look like this, where you have 2 books, 2 turtles in play. One of the turtles unexhausted, ready to block, and the other turtle with like 4 counters on it because you keep activating the focus ability of your book and tapping their guys out.
Right. And I think honestly, like, this is the sort of card, like, this was easier to do than the Admonisher from the focus ability. But I mean, Admonisher really is a card that doesn't work when you have a Phoenixborn that has a really wide battlefield, right? Like if you're playing like a Sembali or a Rymea or a Brennan or Jessa, right, that has a low battlefield count, then like you can probably trigger Admonisher fairly consistent.
Right. And Admonisher, like, is kind of a specific case where I just use that because it has the same wording.
Sure.
But like when you activate Admonisher, either side of Admonisher, getting the 0-2 or getting the 1 damage, is like kind of what you want to be doing anyway, or you wouldn't be playing the card.
Right. What's up, Shrant?
He
loves you, Neil. Shrant loves you.
Hey, Shrant. Shrant didn't want to play Valheim with me. He went to go play Rust with our other friend.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you showing up and giving us a little viewership.
Yeah, man. It's awesome.
So
he says the noobs won't kill themselves.
Yeah, he's got to go kill all those Rust noobs. And by that he means our friend is going to kill them all, and he's going to like farm wood or something. Because our friend Jiga is
it's like
very good at the PvP.
It's like being associated by
yeah,
you know, by that.
See, that is 1000% true. But anyway, so like I said, I think most of the time, assuming you're on plan, you're just gonna you're gonna get your second turtle book, whether it's through focus or Jericho or meditating or all the ways that we know how to focus a book right away.
Right.
And you're gonna get 1 active Turtle Guard in play that's gonna block once every turn. And you're gonna get second Turtle Guard in play that's just gonna just never untap because you keep using the focus ability.
Right. And
I because they're so sticky, because they can't get attacked out, that is going to be effective, I think.
Well, it definitely turns off a very large swath, like from what we've seen so far, a large swath of the removal spell pool, right? Because you can't fester this thing away, right? Like, because you can't get the first damage point on it unless you get the first damage point on it before it gets exhausted. And
it's always going to be festerable, I think, because you're going to block with it, because that's the best way for you to exhaust it.
Sure.
And what it's for, right? Like, it's a unit guard. It doesn't attack. It's meant to block, so it's gonna block, and it's gonna take a little damage.
Sure.
If you're not blocking with it, then I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there will be cases where not blocking with it is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because you would want to activate the focused book ability. But I think it's festerable. What it isn't is
It's also probably decent with chaos gravity. Is that James? The chaos gravity card, is that James?
no.
Sure.
Yes, it is Echo
Echo.
Greystorm.
Yeah.
Um,
Because then you can sort of like potentially, if you've got the focus book, it's Echo. Thank you, Leonard. I appreciate it for chiming in there. Yeah. Because if you have the chaos gravity, like you sort of get the opportunity to get essentially multiple exhaustion effects off. Um, and like it is kind of chaotic.
here's here's the real thing. Is there a reaction spell that puts an exhaustion token on something?
A reaction? I don't think so. No. There is. It's an illusion. It's figures in the fog.
What is it? What is its reaction trigger?
You may play the spell after an opponent declares attackers. Choose a target attacking unit, place one exhaustion token on it. It's no longer attacked.
Um, but that's not. I I wanted there to be one that is put an exhaustion on any unit so that you could like they're gonna like scald you and you can like put an exhaustion token on your thing in response to save it.
Yeah, that's probably pretty broken. But I mean,
Well,
again,
not broken, but
no, but it's pretty
it'd
good.
just be cute.
Yeah.
But like in general, I just think it's a good card, and I think it's very difficult to deal with. If you're gonna scald it, you have to scald it before it's exhausted. It does die to Fester or what's the Two Shadows? Is that the one? Two Shadows is like the best answer to it because you always want it exhausted.
Right. Two shadows just eats it up. Right.
That's the one that discards an exhausted unit, right?
Exhausted unit. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
So that's like a very good answer to it. So it's not unkillable, but it's just hard to deal with, and it's cheap.
so. Let's really talk
Super
about
cheap. It's a 2/3 for one dice.
let's talk about what are actual removals for it. I think Two Shadows is obviously one. Fade Away is another. That's an alteration. You can fade it away at the end of the round. But again, both in illusion. Um, fear? Can you fear it?
Probably.
Yeah, you can fear it for sure.
Um,
If you're playing Jesso, you can fear it.
yeah, any of the like kill target guide things. But we're talking about killing this in a fashion very similar to how you kill like a Hammer Knight or one of the 3/4s
Right.
or one of these tall units. But this is a unit you only spend one dice on.
Correct. So all of those things cost more dice than the unit itself.
Right. This thing is like it's not action efficient because the book takes up your whole turn and the summon takes up your whole turn.
Right.
But like
So,
I think the card is very good. And I think it's like an engine card where, it could be a build around me just because not only does it make efficient guys, once you get them both in play or you have a full battlefield and you get to start using the tap out, like it's just like you were talking about how annoying you think Lightbringer is. Like
yeah, it's on a similar plane to Lightbringer. And I would say that okay. So the other obviously, if you can somehow get a single point of damage on it before it gets exhausted, then Fester works. But the other one is Symbolic. It's Purify.
Symbolic can purify it, yeah.
Yeah, and
but you're still trading up because they have to have an ally to return.
Sure, but there are plenty of allies that we want back to our hand.
Right. It's just you're trading up dice where you spent one dice and they spent dice plus whatever the ally was. But that's probably the closest to breaking even on it that there is.
I think. I
guess Fester's one dice, but you have to do some other work.
Right. I think Fester is never a one dice removal because you have to use something else to do the damage. So the only other one is Two Shadows.
I think it's really funny that
and Two Shadows
like
is
Blood Chains doesn't really stop it from doing its thing.
Well, I mean, it kind of does, right? It takes it just out of the game.
Well, except that like the other half of the book requires you to have an exhausted turtle in play.
No, you have to have an unexhausted turtle. If you do not, you may place one exhaustion token on an unexhausted turtle. You can.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misread it.
Yeah. No, it has the same ability as Time Hopper essentially, where if it's got an unexhausted thing, then do something.
That's not as good as I thought it was. But it's still
because Steady Gaze also would just take it out of consideration. But I mean, if you're spending 2 dice on Steady Gaze,
it turns it in from what I thought, where it was like an always tap out, to like you make two blockers, and then at the end of the round, if one of them is untapped, you get to like put an exhaustion counter on their exhausted guy so it doesn't untap.
Right.
Is probably what usually happens.
So, what does Figures in the Fog cost? It's an alteration or fadeaway. Fadeaway is a one dice, so that's probably a fair exchange.
Right.
Uh,
The difference is that all these one cost removal spells, you're trading a card for a book activation.
right. That's right.
So you're still down resources.
Right. I mean,
Like
it turns into an attrition game at that point, right? Like it's how long are
right.
we going to go?
And this is a control deck card. This is not an aggro card.
No, no, no.
So that's the kind of game that control decks want to play.
Like I could see Turtle Guard being really good with my Shadowhounds. Like just as a
Right. It's it by itself is not the threat, but it's like it's just like I think it's way better than like Gilder or Biter, like the other
it's definitely better than
cards.
Biter, I think, by a country mile. But Gilder has still got a lot of value, and I think Gilder's in particular, when you talk about status tokens and some of these other things that are going on, like has a lot of value in time as we start to talk about
Well,
what time
Gilder is another example of a two color card
sure
that
that forces you into
is
a
not
three-color
a
combination because it forces you into
yeah,
charm, nature, and time if you're going to play it with time. So,
right.
okay, so I think we've kind of gone through that. I don't think we're going to
I'm
have
very
enough.
excited about both these cards. I'm more
Yeah.
excited about both these cards than I was about Standard Bearer. That's
Yeah. I mean, I'm in a similar place. I mean, compared. Yeah, Leonard added that Gilder's good, but it can't block a Frostback Bear. So Turtle is really good at stopping
Turtle just laughs at Frostback
for
Bear.
sure.
It like takes two, becomes invulnerable, and then it recovers one.
Yeah, yeah. So it can take two Frostback Bear attacks, which is pretty solid. And that's always a problem, right? With Bite, like that's what made Biter kind of good in the current card pool was the fact that you could stand in front of a Frostback Bear with Biter. And again, I mean the best use of Biter I've found so far has been playing it with Mayoni because then you could kill the Frostback Bear with Command Strike on from Biter. But this is doing very similar things, and it's going to kill that bear no matter what. So like Turtle Guard Bear, those are you're trading conjurations. Only the Turtle Guard player is only spending one dice, and the Bear player is now spending two dice to do that over and over and over again. So it really does nullify Bear pretty hardcore. Um, like you're going to have some other plan for Bear now if you're going to try to play Bear. Like it's like
Well, I don't know that this like makes Bear bad. I still think Bear's very good.
well, I still think you're going to have to consider
it
like
stands up against Bear pretty okay.
I think you're going to have to consider Dark Presence in Bears if you want to get around them, right? To give Bear Terrifying too. I just don't think there's really any way around
I
that.
mean, you just like depending on what kind of deck you're playing, you just like let your 2/3s play with each other or whatever. Like you're down a dice, but your deck does other things. Like it's not like having Turtle Guard like makes Bear bad, and it's not like having like you can't play Bear now because of Turtle Guard or anything.
Most bears though, the real problem with most bears is most bear decks is that the bear is sort of the feature element, right? And I think it's going to change the way you play bears. I mean, so I mean,
Right. I mean, I personally don't buy into like the like have to get this bear through kind of mentality. Like I think bear is just like a good grindy card because it's a 2/3 for two out of a book. Like that's just a really good rate.
well,
And
it's a 2/3 for like 2.5 because you have to pay the book cost. So
right, but if you're playing a grindy deck where you care about like the actual rate, you care less about the
yeah, Leonard, I agree. Master Vampire is a good Turtle Guard like counter, and
right. You need individual sources of 3 damage, which do exist.
yeah,
And Master Vampire is a good one because obviously like you can't jump in the way of it.
right. So I'm with you. I don't think Turtle Guard is. It's just going to fundamentally shift. Like you're not going to be able to answer all of time's solutions right now, right? So like we have a very limited time card pool. So it's either going to be an aggressive like time hopper time deck, or it's going to be like a grindy time deck with turtle guard. And once we get more time cards, who knows what happens? But based on what we know right now, those are the only real things that we're sort of looking at in time that matter. And and I mean, no offense to Standard Bearer, and I think Blink is a great card, but Blink is Jericho's specific loyalty card, and so for now, if you're playing time, you're probably playing Jericho. But if when we get 5 Phoenix Borns that are time Phoenix Borns, you may not play Jericho anymore. So Blink may not be as impactful overall, because it'll sort of get diluted down by the pool of available time Phoenix Borns. But I do think that what we've talked about in all of this tonight, what I think is really, really interesting about all of this, is almost every card that we've talked about as being answers for these various different things is coming out of Illusion. And Illusion probably needs a little bit of that sort of love overall, because I think Illusion has powerful cards, but they're they're not as strong as some of the cards that are coming out of Sympathy for right now, and Nature. I think Nature and Sympathy are both like kind of top tier from a card pool selection, not necessarily a dice power selection, but a card pool selection. I think when you talk about dice power, Ceremonial is easily the tops, but um, Ceremonial sort of has this, it has good cards, but I think Ceremonial lives a lot off of its Phoenix Borns and their abilities. Like, um, Brennan is essentially a Ceremonial Phoenix Born, and Brennan is his ability puts you on a clock, right? Like, so you're gonna play Ceremonial with it because you need the Ceremonial for Brennan's ability, but yeah. So, anyways, my point through all of this is that I think the existence of time in the meta does indicate things like Two Shadows getting stronger, and Fade Away getting stronger, and um, just various different tools, right, that are out there to deal with these kinds of things. Um, they're all going to get better out of Illusion. I don't think any of the specific Illusion Phoenix Borns, i.e., Vicky, is going to get better, but I do think that a lot of the Illusion pool gets a little bit of a buff from what we've seen so far out of time. Um, and time will tell. And I am being punny again, but it is a thing. So